All right, hello everybody. A little bit of a rough week this week, finishing up the novel, but lost a couple days early in the week and trying to catch up. I'm getting started reading Children of the Lens, so that'll be next week, not this week, but I wanted to get something out this week, and I was going to try to get it out yesterday, but I ended up going back through the entire game of Terranigma, which is a Super Nintendo game that never was released in the US. There was an official English release in Europe that was very rough. The translation was very rough, but we'll get to that. So today, what I want to talk about is as I want to talk about the company Enix, the game company Enix, from before they merged with Squaresoft back in the. So specifically, I want to talk about them in the early '90s, the Super Nintendo era, because Enix had a few different things going on at that point, right? They had, of course, their flagship series, Dragon Quest, which was kind of their big moneymaker, right? And it's worth noting that, unlike what you would expect a company to do today is to, take a flagship moneymaker and just ram it into the ground. In this era of kind of the early 90s, we had Dragon Quests 4, 5, and 6. Dragon Quest 4 was on the NES. We had a remake of Dragon Quest 3 on the Super Famicom that never made it to the US either. Never made it out of Japan, actually, but there's a translation patch out. Very good game. But those three games, I guess 4 technically counting the remake of 3, were like kind of the big moneymakers for Enix at the time. And you'd think that they would like what they're doing today, right? Like Dragon Quest Monsters, Dragon Quest Builders, Dragon Quest blah, 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 over and over again. Dragon Quest 11, Dragon Quest 11 the remake, Dragon Quest 11 the special remake. That's not how Enix operated back in the early 90s. No, what they did was, with the money that they got for producing these extremely popular Dragon Quest games, was they actually made a bunch of really weird, like, ranging from semi-weird to extremely weird, very like spiritual games is probably the way to. It's the best word I have to describe it. We have ActRaiser 1 and 2. ActRaiser 1 was kind of half action platformer, half like god game, and it had a little bit of this kind of like weird mysticism, spirituality kind of thing going on in the first one. But it was kind of muted. Like you were playing someone who was not really connected to the people in any significant way. You just were kind of very elevated from them. There was that element of it, but there wasn't really that connection. We have a bunch of other weird one-offs like EVO, The Search for Eden was an NX release. Awful game design, but very interesting idea of kind of like playing through the stages of evolution from, fish to humanity kind of thing. We had the Ogre series. We had Ogre Battle and Tactics Ogre, which were kind of an exercise in epic storytelling, but weren't really like particularly, epic storytelling and kind of political maneuvering, but weren't really like a religious thing. But what I want to talk about today is a series, and it isn't even really that the whole series kind of really does this amazingly well. But there was a series called Soul Blader, or the Blader series in Japan. It was released in the West as Soul Blazer, and then the second game called Illusion of Gaia was released in the US. And then the third game, Tenchi Sozo, Creation of Heaven and Earth, or was called Terranigma and released in Europe. This Blazer series kind of has this weird. It's unlike anything I've ever experienced in a video game. It has this weird mixture of like theology, while still like novel theology, like fictional theology, while with like this very mystical kind of spiritualistic tone to it, with actual like interaction with kind of the human drama of real life. It's a world where God himself takes a close interest in or with humanity and their lives in general. This is and like the first and third games in the series do a decent job of kind of bringing this around. Soul Blazer is a kind of like it plays a little bit like a Zelda clone. The gameplay itself is not so impressive or novel, but there's something about the feel and the tone of the game, the way that things are discussed and talked about, that lends this weird, like very weird, mystical, spiritual kind of tone to the game that is really something that you don't see a lot. You have like it's deep and it's somewhat weird and it's foreign. Your character, who is like a emissary from God, basically, to try to build the world back up from when it was sealed. When there was an evil force, the evil force had to be sealed away, and now it's time. Now God believes it's time for the world to be brought back to life, and so you, the character that you play as, kind of journeys across the world and one by one destroys evil monsters, and then brings the things that were sealed behind those evil monsters back to life. You start with just kind of like a basic medieval town, but then like the second area, you're building like a forest, and you're not bringing people back, but you're bringing like animals, squirrels and dogs and stuff like that, and birds. And your character can talk to the animals, and it's not just animals, right? Like the fourth section is actually just like a laboratory, and here we see kind of like an influence of like that the Japanese native religion, the native pantheistic religion, where basically now you're bringing back to life inanimate objects, dresser drawers and cabinets and doors, and this kind of harkens back to the concept in Japanese folklore of a tsukumogami, which is like it's a tool or an object that was given a soul by a long period of care and use by humans. But it's not even quite that, because these things are just alive on their own. They aren't old in that particular sense. You have a section that's where all the creatures that you're reviving have very short lives. They have lives that only span over 1 year, and there's like a lot of like philosophical semi-philosophical stuff about how, they have to live every day, 70 times as much as the average person lives in a day, kind of thing. There's all kinds of really weird and interesting stuff in Soul Blazer, and it has this weird mix where you have this silent protagonist. Your character, I don't believe, talks at all to anybody, but people, talk and interact and project their own desires onto your character in kind of like the way that like you early in the game you revive like an old woman, and she kind of like treats you as her son, kind of thing. It's like, you can use the room upstairs to recover your hit points, kind of thing. But like, it doesn't feel game mechanic-y. It feels very like organic, and like you're interacting with these people and you're providing something for them that they were missing. It's very weird, and the game itself, it ends up being that like the last group of people that you revive is the evil empire that was working with the great evil to kind of take over the world. And then there's kind of some interesting stuff at the end there, and I'm not going to completely spoil it all, but the point is that this game started and kind of introduced this very weird, like mystical, spiritual tone that is going to be perfected in Illusion of Gaia, and it also has this sense of like asking questions but not providing answers. Like today, you have games where there's some kind of like philosophical or ideological position that the game wants to thrust upon you. And not a lot of games kind of just ask questions without providing answers. Kind of the good example that I can kind of think of is that early part of like, what's it called? Near Automata, where you start to meet the robots that aren't, destructive, that haven't gone mad, basically. And like they have their own kind of little civilization that they're building. And, it raises questions that probably get answered later in the game about like what happened to humanity, kind of thing. That weird feeling that you get when you first observe the robot village in Nier Automata is kind of a shadow of what you get in the Blazer series. And then we'll skip Illusion of Gaia for the moment because I'm going to spend the most time on that. But the third game in the series, called Tenchi Sozo: Creation of Heaven and Earth, or Terranigma, it was released in Europe. It plays a little bit with these ideas, but much less so. The game is more focused on having more dynamic and varied combat gameplay, kind of exploration and adventuring. You kind of play a character that is unlocking our world from that was sealed somehow. There's kind of a cool, plot twist near the end, but at the same time, it's kind of generic RPG stuff. And while it does try to have kind of that tone or feel of that weird kind of like foreign spiritual feel to it, and foreign isn't the right word. It's like alien, it's a combination of like calming and unsettling at the same time. It's very hard to describe, but like it's one of those games that, because we didn't get it here in the U.S., there's a lot of, I think, following behind it that kind of gives it more credit than it deserves. It's an okay game, but like it covers kind of these ideas of like duality, light and dark, inside, outside, above world, underworld kind of thing. And that's kind of interesting, but it doesn't really do that much with it. So, it's a neat game, but it does not do what Illusion of Gaia does. So now we're moving on to the second game in the series, which I can't say enough that if you like, if what I'm saying about like this weird mystical spiritual tone appeals to you, or if it like really unappeals to you, you might want to try out Soul Blazer and then Illusion of Gaia, because it's a very, how would I describe it? It might change your mind if you think you won't like it, kind of thing. So, Illusion of Gaia is the second game in the series, and it references Soul Blazer in a couple of ways directly. But in general, it's kind of its own plot, taking place in a kind of a fantasy-esque version of the world with some elements of the world in it. What you'll find in Illusion of Gaia is that you end up, exploring a bunch of like famous ancient ruins that actually exist in the world, like the Nazca Plains and ancient Incan ruins and stuff like that. The main character is not silent. The main character talks to various people. There's a lot of really strong characterization in Illusion of Gaia, and a lot of side characters that have kind of their own commentaries on like social class, poverty, broken homes, even dreams, ambitions, varied personalities, even like wishing and journeying and going through hardships and stuff. There's a lot of really interesting narrative going on in Illusion of Gaia. Basically, what ends up happening, or the main thrust of the plot, is that the main character is drawn into this kind of spiritual battle by voices from beyond. And he goes on this journey across the world in order to, kind of deal with this issue that he's been kind of told about through means that nobody else really kind of quite understands. But one of the things about Illusion of Gaia that really surprised me at the time, and surprises me even more now, is how much it pushed the boundaries of what kind of material you would expect to be handed to someone in a game that was marketed to children, right? Like I was probably 10 years old when the game came out, something a little older, a little younger than that maybe, and like there was no like rated T for teen back then. It was just, here's the game, and it is going to be what it is going to be. And Nintendo had a lot of censorship rules about like religious imagery and stuff, but I don't know how Illusion of Gaia like snuck all this past the censors, because there's crazy stuff in here. I have like a list of like issues that this game kind of grapples with or plays with, and the weird and the weird and interesting thing about Illusion of Gaia is that it has this weird sense of like non-judgmentalness to it. with like a lot of the time you'll have kind of these moralistic things in games where it's like, oh well, this is the good choice and this is the bad choice, or like this is the good choice and this is the great choice and this is the bad choice, or like this is the bad choice, but actually the bad choice is the good choice because blah, right? Illusion of Gaia never really like judges anything. The characters in it don't judge the societies that they're interacting with in like the way that you would expect them to. It's very weird. But here's like the kind of things that got into Illusion of Gaia that like are I find interesting, right? We have like mass hallucinations, mass hysteria, and dead societies. We have the notion, we have, commentaries on like starvation and how starvation can like tear down your own inhibitions. And we have a case of scurvy in the game. We have a city that is built upon the backs of slaves in a 1992 Super Nintendo game marketed to children. We have, and it's not like you end up on the side of like the force that frees all the people. Like it's actually way crazier than that, because one of the things that you are collecting throughout the game to access like a hidden area are these red gems, and one of the things that you end up doing in order to get one of the red gems is selling out one of these slaves that had temporarily escaped. It's kind of crazy, right? Like we have a case in the game of people literally gambling with their own lives, and then like in desperation, a person who knows he's lost taking that last glass of poison because he believes he has no other choice. We have implied cannibalism and the self-sacrifice of an animal to save people from starvation. We have themes of reincarnation. We have real-world mysteries making appearances, like I said, the Nazca Plains. You have some real ancient ruins that show up. The Great Wall of China is one of the things in the game. And they're all different from how they are in reality. And there's a reason for that ends up happening, that ends up being illuminated at the very end of the game that I'm not going to spoil. But, things are... You go into this area where you like talk with a bunch of people who are getting ready to leave this one area where like things have gone bad for them, and so they're going to go on they're going to sail a ship to a new place for them to be free and happy and prosperous. And you interact with these people for a little while, and then you find out that something crazy actually happened. And again, I'm not going to spoil that too much either. We have discussions of like fate and destiny and connections of spirit that go beyond the material world. All of these things, including like, implied cannibalism, in the game, how did that get past the censors? We have literally a game called Russian Glass, which is Russian roulette, only with, 6 glasses, and one of them contains poison. These things are stuff that when I replay that game today, I'm like, how did they get this past, the Nintendo's crazy censorship? Was it just because they didn't have any overt imagery, right? Because Nintendo back in the day would take crosses and turn them into like an Ankh, or they take crosses and pentagrams out of games, right? And they take take coffins out and replace them with ghosts. That happened in Dragon Warrior 3 when it was released for the NES here. It's and yet here we have a game that was marketed, because Soul Blazer was just kind of a fun Zelda-like, right? And so this is the sequel to Soul Blazer, and you're like, okay, cool. This Soul Blazer was the kind of game that you could play as a kid. When did I play The Legend of Zelda, right? I played The Legend of Zelda when I was, 5, right? And so, like, a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old could play Soul Blazer and kind of get a taste of all these weird pantheistic, mystical ideas, this weird spirituality, and maybe it would just kind of go over their heads. But I mean, in Illusion of Gaia, it's like, what do you mean? This guy, I drank the fifth glass and I'm not dead. Why are you drinking the sixth glass? And it's like, well, there's commentary there on like, how these people how this guy feels like he's been pushed up against the wall by the rest of the world, kind of thing. It's fascinating stuff even today. Like I still find it incredibly like just something like whoa, right? And like the game manages to talk about all of these issues without being gory, without being, like like without doing things that today games that would play with these ideas would end up rated M for mature, kind of thing, right? This game doesn't do that. Like it's all there, but like it's given like a soft enough touch where like you kind of could just barely miss it if you weren't like thinking about it, kind of thing. And the other weird thing about it is that the game manages to talk about all these issues without ever getting preachy. Like not even the characters really get preachy about things. Like there's no. It's like there's this weird like detachedness in the sense that like, yep, this is how the people in this area of the world live, and there's nothing we can do to change it right now. It's not even part of our what we're trying to do to change it right now. We have other things on our plate that have to be dealt with, and so like you just kind of go on your way to the next area, and you're like, well, we didn't save everybody like you would kind of expect to in RPGs in JRPGs in the mid 90s, kind of thing. And so I don't know. That's kind of what I wanted to talk about today, is that if you haven't ever tried these games out, if you've never heard of them, or if you've never played them, I highly recommend going through the first two games in the series, and even the third one if you have time for it. The first two games are relatively short. You can probably beat Soul Blazer in 5-6 hours, something like that. Illusion of Gaia is a little longer, probably in the 10 to 15 hour range. Not crazy long games, but a lot of really interesting, like just a lot of really interesting ideas placed into these games in general. And the tone is something that you won't find pretty much anywhere else in games anywhere. The third game is longer. It's closer to like 20 hours or 25 hours, kind of in that range. And it, again, it's more focused on kind of like the gameplay aspects, making it more, hack and slashy kind of thing. More action, more, running through this area and avoiding traps kind of thing, as opposed to the first two games, which have pretty simple combat, pretty basic gameplay, but like the actual like contents of the story are where the interest really is, to me at least. They're fun to play, but like just like the fact that these ideas got into this game, the way that they're treated, the broadness of the ideas that are discussed, the kind of ambivalence about these ideas that that the characters experience or are shown, and like the fact that this all made it past a Nintendo censor in the early 90s and was marketed to 10-year-olds is just like amazing to me even today. It was a very strange era back then. And this is the kind of thing that Enix doesn't do anymore either, right? Like Enix is Square Enix has a few really big franchises that it kind of pushes over and over and over again, and they don't really produce stuff that has this kind of weird, nuanced stuff. Even the stuff that's not there on their mainstream lines is kind of like, well, we're gonna do a thing, and it's gonna be pretty straightforward. But I don't know. Maybe I've just missed these games that have this kind of weird tone that have been released in the interim, but I don't know. To this day, Illusion of Gaia is one of the formative experiences of my childhood. just because it was so strange, and it said so many, it asked so many questions while providing so few answers, and not just like questions about like the world of the game, like questions about how you feel or think about various things in real life. And for that, it's one of my like most most important, or not most important, but like most memorable gaming experiences of my youth. Um, I played Terranigma much later because I had to wait until years later when there was emulation and I had a computer and all that stuff. And it's good, but it's not nearly as interesting as Illusion of Gaia or even Soul Blazer as far as tonal narrative considerations. Um, Terranigma is a lot more straightforward in general. There's like one major twist at the end of the game that is moderately interesting, but it's basically kind of standard JRPG fare. Whereas the weird pantheism of Soul Blazer is something that I just don't see anywhere, and the tone and the subject matter of Illusion of Gaia and the way that it's handled is also something that I just don't see anywhere. And maybe I've missed games that have done this. Feel free to drop a comment if you have some good examples of games that remind you of Illusion of Gaia, because I'd be interested to hear about them. But yeah, that's what I've got for today. Only video this week. I got Monday. I was super busy all day, and then Tuesday I got so sick I was a zombie. Figuratively, a zombie the whole day. I basically plopped down and I played Daggerfall for like 6 hours and then went back to sleep. And I wasn't even really playing Daggerfall. I was just kind of like zombieing my way through dungeons as fast as possible without really thinking about anything. I could barely remember Tuesday when I woke up on Wednesday. But yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about today. Definitely worth checking these games out if you've never played them, especially the first two, just because of their unique tone and subject matter. And this is kind of also a minor lament that games almost never do this kind of stuff these days, and for good reason. It's become a much more competitive industry in some ways, and so you can't just say, oh well, we'll take our profits from Dragon Quest V and plow it into these weird spiritual games that have that might have a zero audience, which is to be fair, their Soul Blazer and Illusion of Gaia are so interesting and so weird that I feel like everybody should have played them as well. Even more so than Dragon Quest, which is a niche JRPG kind of thing. Like Soul Blazer and Illusion of Gaia make you think different thoughts than you otherwise would, which is why I'm recommending them today. So that's what I've got for today. Next week, probably be talking about finishing up the novel because I'm done. I'm doing title cards for chapters and like one more read through for typos, and then going to start releasing that, or going to release that. And we'll probably talk about Children of the Lens. I decided that I need to read Dune, or at least try to read it, because the only exposure I have to Dune is from the later books by not Frank Herbert, and the writing in those was so silly that I couldn't really take them seriously. So I figured I'm gonna go back to the source and check that out, because I've never actually read that book. So I have a copy of that incoming, which will arrive early next week. Children of the Lens, probably the second book in the Foundation series I'll be poking at soon as well. Yeah, I've had this idea about talking about the Soul Blazer series for a while, but I didn't really develop it until the last couple of days. So I figured that would be a fun topic and a good thing to recommend to people, because I think people should check these things out. They're so weird, even ignoring like the fact that there's like subject matter in there that like shouldn't have made it to a Super Nintendo game in the early '90s for 10-year-olds. They're still interesting today, in my opinion, and they've kind of gone by the wayside and haven't really been covered too much recently. So anyway, as always, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you like what I'm doing with the channel, you know what to do. And I will say, have a great weekend, and I'll see you next time.